Good morning. It's a sunny summer holiday day. I'm not expecting there to be a lot of people because most of the people will be out there enjoying the sun or out working because, well, work goes on too. Which brings me actually, before we start with today's topic of the deckhand and the way that influences our life, that part of us influences our life. And before we get into that, quick question. What are convenient times for you to come and listen to these live streams? I'm in the Central European time zone, and that means that there is loads of people that I want to reach who do not have the same hours as me and who might be asleep now or who might want to listen in live at some stage when they're not in the middle of work or during the day when they're doing their thing. So let me know, what is a convenient time for you in your time zone? After that small request, let's quickly jump into what we are going to talk about today. And I have prepared for you these three brains. Of course, we're going to talk about psychology because that's my thing. That's what I do. It's in the name. We have these three brains. The rational brain, very good at calculating, very good at making rational decisions and being very sensible about things. The animal brain, which is actually our emotional and social part that creates, that wants to be social, that wants to be happy. But at the very bottom of our brain is the brainstem and the reptilian brain. Reptilian brain is the part of us that, just makes sure that we have all the basic needs that we need to survive. So we're going to have a closer look at what that reptilian brain does. It is ancient, it is millions and millions of years old, and it influences our lives on a daily basis. But because we have these two, higher add-ons, the animal brain and then the neocortex with its rational abstract thinking, they take up a lot of the bandwidth of our thinking. So the reptilian brain is not always very outspoken, or it's outspoken in a way that we don't recognize. And we certainly don't recognize it for what it is, namely our means to survive. And that causes a whole range of issues, psychological issues, behavioral issues in our daily lives. So let's have a quick look. Let's dedicate today to having a look at what the reptilian brain does, how it functions in our daily psychology, and how we can learn to recognize that and learn to use it rather than fight it, because that is what a lot of people do. Bringing up the ship. The rational captain, the emotional first mate, and the instinctive deckhand. It's the deckhand that we're talking about today. Deckhand, as you can see, it's primal, it's instinctive, it's very, very basic, very, very straightforward. And it's easy to assume that because it does not reason the way that our rational brain does, that we assume that the deckhand is stupid. He's not. We'll see, the deckhand is not stupid. Those of you who've been following me for a bit longer, they know already that I've got an extensive history of severe depression, anxiety, and even suicidal episodes. When I went to therapy for that, the primal brain was never addressed. It was already not very common, especially 20 years ago. It was not common for even the emotional brain to be addressed. Everything had to go through cognitive therapy. Everything had to go through rationalizing things, which we all know now doesn't work. There's more to humanity and more to being human than rationalizing everything. But even as short as a couple of years ago, 5-6 years ago, the therapist I had at the time told me that what was screwing me up was the little cunt of a gnome in the back of my brain. And with that, she meant my reptilian brain, my deckhand. The cunt's always lying, and you just need to shut it up. And she actually taught me a few techniques to shut up my deckhand. That to her may have sounded like a fair way of going about this, but what you're doing at that moment, when you suppress the deckhand, you're suppressing your survival instincts. You're suppressing the part of you which has as its sole reason for existing, sole purpose, is to keep you alive. Is that really something that you want to suppress to the extent that you can just ignore it? No, and our reptilian brain, knowing that it does not want, that it should not be ignored, will refuse to accommodate that and act up. And when the deckhand acts up, well, let's just say that when the deckhand is your enemy, your own deckhand is your enemy, you're screwed. Fortunately, they're very easy at forgiving. Why all of this is? That's what we're going to look at. So, first of all, just briefly going over what is the reptilian brain, what is their mode of operation. As it says here on the screen, they are the primal emotions. And essentially, the primal emotions are fear for your life, and, well, actually, there's no really an either. Because we tend to think that the primal emotions are sadness and happiness. No, those are complex emotions. Those are complex emotions because you need to have a concept beyond the here and now. And the deckhand has no concept beyond the here and now. The deckhand only knows right here what you can see, what you can experience in this exact moment. That is their world. They have no concept of time. They have no horizon. They can't say, oh, in a couple of days. No, a couple doesn't exist. In an hour. To a deckhand, that doesn't exist. A minute from now, maybe, with a little help of the other two, they can look that far. But a deckhand without help looks at the here and now, where you are in the environment that you are. Other rooms do not exist. The world outside the rooms don't exist. What you see, that is what there is. Even what's behind you, what's at your back, you may not even be aware of. That limited. The horizon is that limited for this part of your brain. They respond from instinct. They respond not based on calculations because they don't really make calculations. They make an assessment, a binary assessment to do or not to. Literally, Hamlet. Be, not be. Do, not do. So their responses to their environment are very limited. It is either I respond or I do not respond. An answer is yes or it is no. That's it. Beyond that, there is no nuances. There is no yes, but only if, or no, except when. None of those clauses. That's all captain thinking. That's all the rational brain who's able to make exceptions and clauses and think in complex terms. To a deckhand, either something is acceptable or it's not. End of story. Is that such a bad thing? That it sounds very limited and it sounds very unsophisticated to, us humans. But yeah, they are unsophisticated in the sense that they don't need to be sophisticated. They've been around for millions of years. They've kept creatures alive for millions of years functioning this way. So why would they need to be any more sophisticated than that? Because strictly speaking, the deckhand only cares about survival. They only care about keeping the ship afloat and to do the things that is needed for that. On a daily basis, all the daily needs that our body physically needs to function, that is the responsibility of the deckhand. So they're responsible for food, for becoming hungry, thirst. When you're thirsty, you want something to drink, you want some water. Cheers. They respond to that. They respond to your need to sleep. Your body, your brain needs to shut down and rest or recuperate. When you're in pain, it's the deckhand who makes sure that you either favor, for example, if you twisted your ankle, that you favor the other leg so you don't do more damage than was already done. So the damage that was done, the pain, can heal. It's little things like that in which the deckhand influences our daily life. They are always there, but usually as an undercurrent. Picturing our crew as people, because that's what ship psychology is about. When you view the different parts of your brain as individuals, it becomes easy to understand why they do the things that they do. The captain, for example, is extremely eloquent. They can have long speeches, use long sentences with complicated words and complex structures and all kinds of clauses. That's what the captain's good at. The first mate is much more harebrained about the way they communicate. They use simpler words, shorter sentences, loads and loads of gestures. You will always see me gesturing a lot. That is part of the first mate wanting to convey their story. Music, sound, colors, all kinds of things, all kinds of visuals. That's the first mate. That's the part of us that communicates in more than just words, but with enthusiasm and energy. And the deckhand has very little need of language. If your answer to everything is essentially yes or no, you don't need much by way of language. Simple, sometimes crude gestures suffice. That's more than enough. If you're unhappy with something, slamming your fist on the table makes it very clear to everyone, communicates to everyone around you that you're not happy. That's how the deckhand communicates. If you are happy, you simply don't do anything. Okay, let it come. Let the next moment come. I will respond when there is something to respond to, and as long as I'm happy, why should I respond? The deckhand, especially when the deckhand is happy, you don't really notice their presence very much. They work in the background, make sure that, you get up to go to the toilet, you go up to get something to drink. But yes, they're also responsible for our immediate survival, our, the big survival actions. Those don't happen very often. Typically, in the normal circumstances, being under physical threat is not something that happens very often. In the modern Western world, we're no longer hunted by predators in the sense of, tigers and lions hiding in the bushes ready to snatch you and make a meal out of you. We don't have that kind of danger anymore. We do have other kinds of predators, people who want to do us harm. And the survival instinct responds to that in the same way as it would to a tiger or a lion. When you're afraid someone might be following you at night when you walk across the street, that's your deckhand becoming alert, becoming very aware of the immediate surroundings and that particular threat to assess whether or not you should take action. As long as you don't take action, you can just walk, continue, but then when there comes a point where the deckhand says, no, we're taking action, you run or you turn around and you fight the person, confront them. That is all deckhand. And yes, you'll have your heart pounding in your throat because all of that, the whole fight and flight response to that is physical. So you feel your heart pounding, you feel your pulse go up, you feel tense, you feel anxious because the whole survival response physically is the same as anxiety. That anxiety you feel in that moment, that is what your deckhand cooks up to make sure that your body is ready to survive. On a day-to-day basis, it's much more about being safe. It's much more about being comfortable because when you're comfortable, you're safe. When something is familiar, you also know it's safe. So that's our comfort zone. It's comfortable, it's familiar. That means it's safe. That means we're good here. We're not moving. We're not taking any action. Deckhand sees no reason to act as long as you feel safe. Really, what they're doing a lot more in the background than we'd give them credit for. Yesterday, I saw a very interesting research that was recently done that people who work in an open office environment tend to be more anxious, feel more tension, low key, but they would physically respond to that. And then they tested this by putting people in a regular room alone, but play the sounds of an open office environment. People's heart rate would go up, they would become tense, they would start sweating, they become hyper alert, all the basic responses to survival. And the only reason that your body, your deckhand, insists on a survival response is because you feel threatened. On a day-to-day basis, we feel threatened much more often than you'd think. So we have the deckhand responding to that much more often than you may realize. When you get that kind of response to an oncoming car, when there's a car speeding towards you when you're crossing the road and your deckhand is suddenly there, suddenly tense, takes over and gets you to safety, at that moment you're happy with that response. But when the threat is not that clear, like in an open office environment, where you feel that you should feel safe, but you don't, that's when you become annoyed with the deckhand. Problem is, getting annoyed at the deckhand and suppressing them, ignoring them, doesn't make you feel safe. In fact, it tells the deckhand that actually the situation is incredibly unsafe, so unsafe even that you cannot do anything with their warnings, so they stay alert, they stay anxious. There's also another side to the deckhand. Especially when a deckhand is reasonably comfortable, they are perfectly able to function and perform basic routines, things that you do every day, as long as it's familiar, something you've done more often. Familiar routines on an automated pilot. You get up in the morning, you make your breakfast, you have your coffee, you go to work, you do your job. You can even make small talk and basic social interactions based on routines. To the rest of the world, it seems like, you're just being you. You do your thing, you go home, you make dinner, watch some TV, go to bed. Your deckhand is perfectly capable of running you through that entire day without help from your first mate or your captain. When you're stressed, or when you're hungover after going out for a night, the deckhand's basic routines and their ability to just do that in an automated fashion, that allows you to continue functioning until the rest of your brain is also back with the program and they're also getting involved again. That can be a lifesaver, especially for a couple of days. When you're feeling unwell, but not so unwell that you want to stay home or you can stay home, or when you have children who depend on you. I've functioned on the automated routine of the deckhand for 4 years, looking after my son when I was actually too ill to do anything else. But I had to look after my son. My son was very young at the time. He was still an infant. He depended on me. So I did what had to be done to make sure that he was safe, he was fed, he was as happy as I could make him in that moment. Deckhands are lifesavers for that. What they can't do, however, is deal with deviations. As long as the routine is basic enough to do, if it's something that is familiar enough, your deckhand will do that without a hitch. No one will notice. The rest of the world around you will not notice that it's you operating on a very low level. When you are confronted with something that you did not expect, sudden changes, for example, your boss comes with a new project and you're going to be part of that project. That's something new. That's something you can't do on an automated pilot because there is no president. You need your captain for that. That's something the deckhand can't do. And they may become defensive when confronted with a situation that they did not expect. You travel the same road to work every single day, only today there are roadworks and you have to take a detour. The deckhand is not well equipped to deal with that kind of deviation. They can work it out, but they need a lot more time. Your captain will simply, look at the board, take the detour, and that's okay. But if it's just your deckhand without help, that takes a bit of time to process, okay, what am I going to do now? Because now I have to think about another kind of action because the action I was going to take is no longer valid because the road's open. That shows how that level of our brain thinks and how well they can adapt to functioning on a day-to-day basis. They also have something that the other two brains do not, and that's the override. Because the deckhand is our survival instinct, they need to be able, and they are able, to override the rational and the emotional brain. When that car is coming toward you, you're crossing the road and the car is coming toward you. In that moment, you don't have time to calculate how fast that car is driving and how quickly it will reach you. You don't have time to to think about whether or not it's socially appropriate to make a run for it in these clothes, or whether that will look weird or, people will talk about that. No, your only concern is survival. And to shut down the rational and the emotional response that you will have to any situation, because to any situation you will have these three responses. But when your survival is at stake, your deckhand will literally shut the other two out and take over control of the ship, take over control of your body. And they make sure that you dash for the curb and out of the way of the car. That is a complete override. That override is triggered by sudden, intense threats. It can also be triggered by sudden, intense pain. When you're hurting, you hurt yourself somewhere and the pain tends to come and go. It ebbs and flows a bit. And when the pain is very bad, there is no rational thought anymore. You find it difficult to talk. You're barely aware of anything beyond the pain in your body. You may be aware that there's someone near you. Maybe there's a doctor trying to address you, but you can't properly respond to them because you're non-verbal. Deckhands are non-verbal. Then the pain ebbs a bit and the other two brains come back on. The override stops. That's when your captain and your first mate can communicate with the person with you in the room, and you can explain, okay, I'm feeling this and this is what happened. I had this happen to me when I had food poisoning, when my body hurt so incredibly much that I did not know what to do with myself. I could not explain what was going on. Then when the pain ebbed away a bit, I could feel the rest of my brain come on, and I could explain to, in this case, my husband, explain to him what I was feeling, what was happening, and what I thought was going on. I could make the analysis that this was food poisoning. It probably wasn't dangerous, but it was hurting like hell. And then the pain came back, and I became non-verbal again. That override, that is something only the deckhand can do. The rational mind cannot override the emotional or the instinctive brain. The emotional brain cannot override the rational brain or the instinctive brain. They can try, they can overshout, but they cannot override. The deckhand can shut down so that you can completely focus on surviving this moment until the next moment, until the moment that you're safe again, when the pain ebbs away or when you're out of danger. Now, the reason that the deckhand is capable of this, whereas the other two parts of the brains are not, has to do with the fact that the deckhand thinks in binary terms. We tend to think binary is explicitly black or white. It's good or bad. So there is this duality. There's always two opposites opposing each other. That is not what the deckhand does. The deckhand takes binary thinking to a literal 1-0. On, off. If something is off, if it is non-existent, if it does not figure, it's a 0. Now, in a computer code, everything is ones and zeros. Off is a 0, 1 means that it's on. So, what does that look like on a deckhand level? Deckhand thinks in yes or no, on or off. The opposite of feeling good is not feeling bad. No, either they feel good or not good. Either they feel safe or not safe. And I say feel, but in fact, the deckhand thinks in terms of things are or are not, be or not be. So something is good, pleasant, comfortable, safe, or it is not good, not pleasant, not comfortable, not safe. It's very often said that negations like that our brain, especially the lower brains, don't respond to negations. Because it sounds like good opposes good, omitting the not. And the thing is, while that is true, I'm open to suggestions on how else to explain it. Because language is not fitted to describe something that does not exist. To a deckhand, something is or is not. It is, or there is blank, nothing. And if there's nothing, there is no reason to respond. If it is, then there is a reason to respond. So act, not act. Hurt, not hurt. If something's hurting, that's a trigger to take action. If it's not hurting, there is nothing. Best way to describe a deckhand who does not feel the need to act would be a kind of contentment. But the word contentment already suggests that there's joy involved, and that's all first mate. It's literally act, not act. Something is or something is not. What I can see is, that is here. I can see that, I can observe that, that exists. What is behind me or in another room, I cannot see, therefore does not exist. This moment, I can see, I can experience, I feel, I know, this is. This moment is. An hour from now, a minute from now, I can't see that, I can't experience that, it does not exist. That is the true nature of binary thinking. Something is not. Now, how can you use that to your advantage? As we've seen, the deckhand has an enormous impact on your life on a day-to-day basis, and they have a lot of influence on how you approach things. They just don't always show themselves. So how can you use this almost alien way of thinking? Well, for one thing, the deckhand has a large part in our habits, because they are the part that functions on the automated pilot, that does things out of familiarity. They are the ones who continue habits. Let's first take habits that don't have a physical addiction element to it. Every morning you take the same route to your bus stop. This may be the fastest route, this may be the easiest route. You just walk that route out of habit. Now, if you want to change that, for example, you no longer want to take the bus, but you want to go cycle, that requires a change of habit. And the first few times, the rest of your brains are like, yeah, okay, we're going to take the bike, we're going to do that. And you feel this resistance. And the resistance is in part the deckhand saying, yeah, but that's not what we always do. We always go by bus. Why do I have to cycle now? It doesn't mean that you don't want to cycle. It's just the question, why are we changing this? Why is the safe, familiar route not good enough? And the first couple of days, when you put a lot of effort in, your captain and your first mate put a lot of effort into taking the bike and cycling, if that's a very pleasant experience, okay, that's when you start cycling. Because the deckhand says, oh, okay, this is apparently the new habit that we're doing. We're doing that. That's okay. If it's not comfortable, your deckhand pulls back to what they know is comfortable. So you're not cycling to work the next day. You're sore, muscle aches. Now let's take the bus. That's safer, that's familiar. Let's go do that. And your deckhand can be very, very persuasive because they have this override ability. Doesn't always mean that they have to completely override you, but they are very persuasive. So while your captain and your first mate say, yeah, well, we should be doing this. Nuh-uh, we're going by bus. So changing habits can be very difficult if you don't have the deckhand on board. When you do have the deckhand on board and you can address them in a way that they understand, rather than just drag them along, they can make changing your habits very easy. Because deckhands rarely ask questions. So if you decide for yourself, wholeheartedly, so your captain and your first mate together decide, okay, the bus is no longer an option. That is no longer a safe option. Doesn't have to be a reason for it. Just, that's no longer a safe option. From now on, we're cycling. Then the deckhand says, okay, that option is or is not, that option is not. You completely forget that going by bus is an option. Your captain remembers, your first mate may remember, but your deckhand completely ignores the bus stop. You have your bicycle, so the next morning you go to your bicycle because that is how you go to work now. That is what reality is now. And the first couple of days it's going to take some time to get used to the route that you take by bicycle, because that will be different than the motions and routine of going by bus. But after about 4 or 5 days, say 1 work week, you have a routine. You have a routine for the deckhand to fall back on. And at that moment, the no-brain option is to take your bicycle and go to your work rather than take the bus. And in this case, that means that it can very easily, you can change your habits that way. When you involve your deckhand and show them that this is the new reality, this is what is, everything else automatically is not, this is, your deckhand's okay with that. That also works with substances. The thing with substance addictions, habits that are based on physical addictions, there's 2 components to that. Yes, there is a certain physical component. For example, coffee. When you drink a lot of coffee, there is a physical addiction. That means that when you stop drinking coffee, you will get the withdrawal symptoms. Now, there's also the whole reason why you started leaning towards those substances. If you become addicted, that means you eat or use too much of a certain substance to a point where it's no longer physically healthy, and that can be coffee, that can be sugars, that can be alcohol, that can be cigarettes, that can be various kinds of drugs, painkillers. The reason you started taking them is typically not the deckhand. It is the first mate, the emotional part of our brain. They want to feel good, they want to have a certain experience, or they want to forget something, or they want a diversion. The first mate is all about diversion. They're very good at that. They are constantly being distracted because that is their mode of thought. But the important thing is to realize that binge eating, comfort food, is not the deckhand. It's the first mate who finds the comfort there. It's the first mate who finds the comfort in the substances. Ultimately, the body becomes adapts and maybe even becomes addicted to the substances. Yes, that part is the deckhand. But 4 years ago, I was 20 kilos heavier than I am now, and I decided I needed to lose weight. Different diets were not working. Now, eating healthier food, it just wasn't happening because my first mate was so insecure, wanted all kinds of foods. So I couldn't convince myself to eat less. I could perhaps convince myself to eat differently. But my first mate wouldn't accept that. That's when I came across the keto diet. Keto diet, for those who aren't familiar with it, it's not a diet, actually, it's a lifestyle. Like being a vegetarian, people who are vegetarians don't have a diet, they don't eat meat and poultry. Keto is kind of like that, but for carbohydrates. Sugars, starch, in any and all of their varieties. So what you do is you cut out all but the unavoidable minimum of sugars. And this changes your metabolism, and that helps you to lose weight without eating less. So you can still eat all you want, but you leave out anything with sugar or starch in it. But I love potatoes, I love pasta, I love bread, a lot of things that I really, really like that were very high on sugar. So the way that I managed to make that switch, literally overnight, was to address my deckhand. My captain set my deckhand down and said, look, this is the situation. We're eating too much sugar. We're going to stop that completely. First mate still wants to have good food, still wants to have things that he enjoys, that give him comfort. We're going to change what gives him comfort. These things are food. All of this, bread, pasta, potatoes, rice, sugar, fast food, soft drinks, all of that is no longer food. It's not edible. This is edible. So I gave him a very clear idea. These are the things that this is reality, this is food. Everything else automatically became non-food. And the next day I went shopping because I needed to get different kinds of foodstuffs. And I see myself standing in front of the cake and the bread department in the supermarket. And they have delicious croissants, and they have kaiserbrötchen and all kinds of really things I absolutely love. And I look at it, and my deckhand says, this is not food. It was literally as appetizing as staring at at shelves of paint. It was not edible. So I shrugged and went to the vegetable department, went to get some meat snacks, went to get some cheese, all the things that I could have, all the things that were food. Overnight I changed this. I never went back. That is the brilliance of the deckhand. When you have habits that you find very hard to kick, that's typically your first mate getting angry that they don't want to give up this comfort that they imagine it gives. It doesn't give them the comfort. That's why you keep wanting to have more of it, because the first mate's way of thinking is, well, if I just have more, eventually I'll come to a point where it will give me what I want. It doesn't work that way. But to get the deckhand on board and say, okay, you can have your comfort within these limits, and everything else does not exist. Not to me. I can drive past the McDonald's and not even register that it's a restaurant. You know, my son loves candy, as all kids do. We go to a candy store. I get a little nauseous because of the sugar in the air, because you can smell the sugar, and I'm not used to it anymore, so it's very strong to me. But I can stand there and have no single craving whatsoever, because my deckhand says this is not food. This is not edible. This is not comforting. This is not. That is how you can address the deckhand and have the deckhand help you. When the deckhand warns you that something is wrong, it says, I don't feel right about this. Anxiety is most of the time your deckhand responding to nervousness from either their own perception or from the first mate or the captain. And they say something's wrong. This needs to be addressed. I sense a threat. You two are nervous, or maybe one of you is nervous, but nervous and scared even to a point where I say, okay, that means there's a threat. So the deckhand says, here's my warning. And if you ignore that warning, if you ignore the anxiety, that is when it becomes worse. Because your deckhand says, look, why aren't you listening to me? Captain, first mate, hello, I'm warning you there's a danger here. Why aren't you listening to me? So that fire alarm keeps blaring louder and louder and louder. So your anxiety, your physical anxiety gets worse and worse and worse and worse because it's not being addressed. And sometimes calming your deckhand, calming your anxious deckhand is as simple as saying, yep, I'm scared. This and this situation is happening, or is going to happen, or might happen, and I'm scared. Not explaining why you were scared. Forget about all the reasons why you're scared. Your first mate and your captain can come up with endless and endless lists of reasons to justify that anxiety. But it is or it is not. The reasons are not important. Acknowledging, here, now, in this moment, I am scared. I may not even know exactly what I'm scared of, but I'm scared. Just that acknowledgement, that in itself can be enough to lower your stress levels sufficiently that the anxiety doesn't become overwhelming. Saying it out loud to yourself, admitting out loud, yep, I'm scared, tells your deckhand that their warning was heard, that you are aware of the threat, that you are aware that they're trying to raise the alarm. When the deckhand knows that his warning has been heard, he can switch off the alarm. So your stress levels tone down and the physical feeling of anxiety becomes less. It takes a couple of minutes, up to half an hour, for it to really tone down, simply because hormones take that long to get processed and disappear from your bloodstream. But within a few minutes to half an hour, you will feel considerably calmer. But the important thing here is to stick to, yes, I'm scared. We automatically tend to follow that up with because. Forget all the becauses. Just as soon as you find yourself thinking, oh, but I'm scared because what will... That's your first mate and your captain. And the list that they can come up with is literally endless. They will find fault or dangers in everything because that is what anxiety does to them. And they get caught in the loop. So it's up to your deckhand to say, okay, I'm lowering the anxiety levels so that the captain and the first mate can come back to their normal functionality. And it's in helping your deckhand calm down, your captain's stress levels come down, and suddenly it becomes a lot easier to reason and to truly calculate how real this threat even is. And when your deckhand is calm and your captain has their sense of control back, that's when the first mate says, oh, okay, I'm completely at a loss, but you two got it covered. I'm trusting you. And they calm down too. So you see that when that therapist years ago told me to just ignore the little cunt, literally her words, to ignore my deckhand and literally shove him aside and not listen at all because he had nothing interesting to say. You can imagine how wrong she was. It took me years to discover how wrong she was. In that moment, instinctively, my deckhand rebelled against that comment. And actually my captain and my first mate both also disagreed with her. And after that comment, I did not go back to that therapist. We need our deckhand. Our society is very, very focused on being rational, about being reasonable. But we need our instinctive deckhand. They influence our life on a day-to-day basis. They are literally the part of us that keeps our body functioning. So of course we need them, but we also need to heed them. Listen to the warnings that they give us and let them help out on the ship. If you want to change a habit, address the deckhand first, because you will be able to change your habit literally overnight. Go cold turkey with something overnight because you have your deckhand on board. And when your deckhand has decided that this particular food substance, this alcohol, these drugs, and all that stuff is not, when they've made that switch, yes, you will have the withdrawal symptoms. The physical dependency is still there, but your deckhand will find the strength and the courage to see that through. Yes, you could use some help with that sometimes. But when your deckhand has decided this is the way to go, that is the way they go. No ifs or buts. And you will see through the withdrawal symptoms. You will see through the consequences of the changes that you made. When you go cycling to work one day to the next, you're going to be sore. You're going to have muscle aches, of course. If you're not used to cycling every day, it's going to cause muscle aches. It's going to have effect on your body. But your deckhand can handle that because they know what it is. They know why it is. This is, when you look at the entire crew, it's the first mate who decides the destination. It's the first mate who dreams where you want to go, what you want to do, what you want to achieve. Big dreams, small dreams. The desires of the first mate are driving. That's literally your drive. The captain decides the course. The captain decides, okay, if that's where you want to go, this and this and this is what we have to do. This is how we're going to get there. And if that doesn't work, there's this and this alternatives. Once the captain has set out that course, it's the deckhand that executes it. It's the deckhand who will keep you on course. Give them that chance. Give yourself that chance. Don't ignore 1/3 of your brain because of what? Because it's not sophisticated? Maybe not. But your deckhand is absolutely vital to your survival in all different aspects. And it can make your life so much easier when you know how to address them, how to involve them. And addressing them is as simple as yes-no questions. Don't give yourself an alternative. Don't say, do I want a cheese sandwich or a ham sandwich? Those are opposites, alternatives. Your deckhand cannot choose from that. So if you want to address your deckhand, sense how your deckhand functions. Cheese sandwich. Do I want this? Yes or no? No. Okay. Ham sandwich. Do I want this? Yes or no? No. And then you go look for, is there something in particular that I want? Or maybe you see the cheese sandwich and says, yep, cheese sandwich. You start eating and you completely ignore the fact that there's a ham sandwich to choose from. By limiting your options like that, you also reduce the anxiety of choice. Because when you have multiple options, that's when your first mate and your captain come in to discuss which is the most sensible option, which is the most desirable option, and they get to argue. Your deckhand is very simple, and not just with food, but with everything. Something is or it is not. Yes, I want this. No, I don't. And if it's a yes, go with that. And if it's a no, find something else and ask if that is what you want, yes or no. One thing at a time. Keeping things that simple, keeping things that straightforward makes life so much easier. Because if nothing else, the deckhand, when they feel content and comfortable, they are so incredibly laid back. And that is where you can find safety inside yourself. The deckhand is the part of you that gives you the solid basis on which to operate. That is the hull of your ship that carries you through life's ocean, to be very poetic. That's what I wanted to share with you today. If you have any questions, pop them over to me. And again, let me know what time would be suitable for you in your time zone, because I would love for you to be there as well. So let me know, and I'll see you, if all goes well, next Monday.